The applause was like static, a meaningless crackle in the sterile air of the press hall. Alastair Finch, CEO of Ethel Corp., stood behind the podium, his face a mask of bored indifference that the media mistook for stoicism. They were launching the Ethel 7, another sleek black rectangle of glass and silicon that did incrementally more than the last one. He spoke the pre-written words about connectivity and innovation, his mind 1,000 miles away, calculating market penetration and logistics chains. As the final, obligatory wave of clapping washed over him, he turned to leave, his personal security detail forming a silent, moving wall around him. That's when he saw her. A small girl, no older than 7, had somehow slipped past the velvet ropes. She wore a thin, faded red coat, 2 sizes too big, and her dark hair was a tangled mess. In her outstretched hands, she held a small, crudely carved wooden bird. His security chief, a formidable man named Harris, moved to intercept, but Alastair, for a reason he would never be able to articulate, held up a hand. The girl took a hesitant step forward, her eyes wide and impossibly brown. "This is for you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. She pressed the wooden bird into his hand. It was light, almost weightless, and rough to the touch. He curled his fingers around it, an automatic, dismissive gesture. He was about to hand it off to an aide when the girl smiled, a gap-toothed, brilliant flash of light in the dim hall. "You look sad," she said simply. "Maybe this will help." Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she slipped back into the dispersing crowd and was gone. Harris was at his side instantly, murmuring apologies, but Alastair just stared at the spot where she had been. He glanced down at the pathetic little carving in his palm and felt a surge of irritation. A security breach. A distraction. He shoved it into his pocket, the rough wood scratching against the fine silk lining of his suit, and forgot about it. Later that night, in his penthouse apartment that overlooked the city like a God's eye view, the silence was absolute. It was a curated silence, engineered by triple-paned glass and sound-dampening technology. Alastair stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights a glittering carpet of meaningless victories below. He had everything. He had nothing. He undid his tie, the knot a familiar constriction in his throat. As he took off his jacket, his fingers brushed against the lump in his pocket. He pulled out the wooden bird. In the cold, recessed lighting of his apartment, it looked even more pathetic. The wings were uneven, the beak slightly crooked. It was the work of a child or an amateur. He walked over to the waste receptacle, a sleek chrome cylinder that opened with a silent electronic hiss. His hand hovered over the opening, ready to drop the useless trinket into the void. But the girl's words echoed in the manufactured silence. "You look sad." It was an absurdly simple observation, yet no one had dared say it to his face in over a decade. He was powerful, respected, feared. Sadness was a vulnerability he had excised from his life years ago, along with joy and hope and everything else that made a man weak. He looked at the bird again. There was a faint line running along its belly, almost invisible against the grain of the wood. A seam. His curiosity, a long-dormant instinct, was piqued. With a flick of his thumbnail, he pried it open. The 2 halves of the bird fell apart in his palm. Tucked inside the tiny, hollowed-out cavity was a minuscule, tightly folded square of paper. It was old, yellowed at the creases. He carefully unfolded it. On it, written in a faded, spidery script, was a sequence of characters, a jumble of letters and numbers. 8B29, K4L1, P8T3. He stared at it, his breath catching in his chest. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, the silence suffocating. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. It couldn't be. It was impossible. He hadn't seen that notation, that specific alphanumeric structure, in 15 years. Not since the fire. Not since Liam. He stumbled back, collapsing into a leather armchair that cost more than a car. The paper, so small and fragile, felt impossibly heavy in his trembling hand. It was a fragment, a ghost. It was the first 16 characters of the Daedalus key, an encryption algorithm he and Liam had designed in their college dorm room, a key that was supposed to unlock a future they had dreamed of together, a key that was supposed to have been destroyed, lost forever, in the flames that had taken his best friend's life. Sleep did not come. Alistair spent the night staring at the ceiling of his cavernous bedroom, the sequence of numbers seared into his vision. 8B29, K4L1, P8T3. It was like a phantom limb, an ache from a part of his life he had amputated long ago. Liam. The name was a wound. They had been inseparable, two sides of the same brilliant coin. Alistair was the pragmatist, the strategist. Liam was the dreamer, the visionary. Ethel Corp was built on the ashes of their shared dream, a company that was a hollow echo of what they had intended to create. They weren't just going to build phones. They were going to build a new way for the world to connect, a decentralized, free-flowing network of information they called Daedalus. It was to be their gift to the world, a tool of empowerment for the masses. The key was its heart, a 256-character string of impossible complexity split into 16 pieces. They had each memorized 8 fragments. It was their failsafe, their pact. The system could only be activated if they were together, a digital handshake across a chasm of code. Then came the fire at their small lab, a ferocious, inexplicable blaze that had reduced their prototypes to molten slag and Liam to a name in an obituary. The official report called it faulty wiring. Alistair had called it the end of his life. He had salvaged what he could from their early work, pivoting their ideas towards commercial, profitable applications. He built Ethel into a titan of industry, a monument to his own grief and guilt. He had convinced himself that success was a fitting eulogy for his lost friend. He had lied to himself for 15 years. The first light of dawn streaked the sky, painting the city in hues of gray and bruised purple. Alistair sat up, the exhaustion a physical weight on his shoulders. He couldn't dismiss it. He couldn't rationalize it away. That little girl, a complete stranger, had handed him a key to a locked room in his own soul. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the speed dial for his security chief. He hesitated. What would he say? Find a 7-year-old girl in a red coat. She gave me a piece of wood containing a ghost. It sounded like madness. But the alternative, that it was a coincidence, a random string of characters on a scrap of paper, was even more insane. The probability was infinitesimal. He made the call. Harris. His voice was rough, strained. Yes, Mr. Finch? Harris was instantly alert, his professionalism a comforting certainty in Alistair's chaotic thoughts. The press conference yesterday. At the end, a little girl approached me. Sir, I am deeply sorry about that lapse. The team responsible has been reprimanded. It will not happen again. I don't care about that, Harris. I need you to find her. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Find her, sir?" "Yes. Review all security footage from the venue, the street cameras, everything. She was about 7, dark hair, wearing a red coat. I want to know who she is, where she lives, who she was with. I want to know everything." "May I ask the reason, sir?" It was a polite, professional inquiry, but Alistair could hear the underlying question. "Have you lost your mind?" "It's a security matter," Alistair lied, the words tasting like ash. "She may have been a plant, a distraction for something else. I want her found. Use every resource we have. I want a report on my desk by noon." He hung up before Harris could ask any more questions. He stood and walked back to the window. The city was waking up now, the arteries of traffic beginning to flow. Down there, somewhere in that sprawling, anonymous maze of steel and concrete, was a little girl who held an impossible piece of his past. The hunt had begun. The next few days were a study in frustration. Harris's reports were clinical, precise, and utterly useless. The girl's image was captured on dozens of cameras inside the venue. A tiny flash of red in a sea of gray and black suits. They tracked her outside, where she seemed to melt into the afternoon crowds. She didn't get into a car. She didn't meet up with an adult in the immediate vicinity. She simply walked down the street, turned a corner, and vanished from the grid of Ethel's all-seeing eye. The facial recognition software came up empty. There was no match in any public or private database. It was as if she didn't exist. "We've run her image against school records, social service registries, everything," Harris explained, standing stiffly in Alistair's office. "There's no digital footprint. It's unusual." Alistair leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. His office was an extension of his apartment, minimalist, cold, with a view that was more of a statement than a pleasure. On his desk, next to a holographic stock ticker, sat the two halves of the wooden bird. "Unusual isn't good enough, Harris. Keep looking. Broaden the search. I want teams on the ground in that area. Show her picture to every shopkeeper, every street vendor, every doorman within a 20-block radius." "Sir, that will require significant manpower. It will be conspicuous." "I'm not paying you to be inconspicuous, Harris. I'm paying you to get results." The command was sharp, brutal. It was the way he ran his company. It was the way he lived his life. But for the first time, it felt hollow. He was throwing billions of dollars of corporate resources at finding a child, all because of a sequence of numbers that felt like a dream. As Harris left, Alistair picked up the piece of paper again. 8B29, K4L1, P8T3. He typed it into a secure terminal, one that was air-gapped from any network. He then typed in the 16 characters of the first fragment he had memorized all those years ago, then the second, then the third. He still knew them all by heart. They were a part of him, a catechism of a faith he had long since abandoned. He tried to run a decryption simulation based on the incomplete key. The system returned a string of gibberish. It was useless without the other 12 fragments. But the fact that it was a valid piece of the dataless key was undeniable. Liam had designed the structure. It had his fingerprints all over it. The code was as unique as his laugh, as distinctive as the way he used to run his hand through his unruly hair when he was deep in thought. Alistair closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment he was back in their dorm room. The air smelled of stale pizza and ozone from an overloaded circuit board. Liam was hunched over a keyboard, his face illuminated by the green glow of the monitor, a manic, brilliant grin spreading across his face. "I've got it, Allie. It's beautiful. It's a labyrinth of pure logic. No one will ever be able to crack this." Alistair had smiled. "No one but us." "No one but us," Liam had echoed, his eyes shining with a fierce, unwavering belief in the future they were building. The memory was so vivid it was painful. He had spent 15 years burying that version of himself, the young man who believed in something more than profit margins and market share. Now, a little girl in a red coat was forcing him to start digging. The days bled into a week. Harris's teams came up with nothing. The city had swallowed the girl whole. Alistair grew more and more agitated. He snapped at his board of directors, canceled meetings with investors, and spent hours staring at the grainy security footage on a massive screen in his office, zooming in on the girl's face. Her expression wasn't malicious or cunning. It was open, innocent. "You look sad." He started walking. He, who hadn't walked on a public street without a phalanx of security in years, would leave his office tower and just walk. His collar turned up, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He revisited the neighborhood around the convention center, a place he usually only saw through the tinted windows of his car. He saw the faces of the people who lived and worked there, the lines of worry and laughter etched into their skin. It was a world away from the curated perfection of his life. He saw children playing in a small concrete park, their shouts and laughter a stark contrast to the engineered silence he called home. He saw poverty and struggle, but he also saw community, people talking on stoops, vendors calling out to familiar customers. It was messy, chaotic, and alive. He felt like a ghost, an observer from another world. He was looking for a little girl in a red coat, but he was starting to realize he was also looking for something else, something he couldn't name, something he had lost in the fire. It was a lead so small, so insignificant, that Harris's team had almost discarded it. A street cart vendor, a man who sold roasted nuts a dozen blocks from the convention center, vaguely remembered the girl. "Yeah, the little one in the red coat," he'd said, squinting at the photo on the agent's tablet. "She comes by sometimes. Never buys anything. Just looks. Likes to watch the pigeons." He gestured vaguely to the east. "She always comes from that way. From over past the bridge. The Narrows." The Narrows. The name itself was a warning. It was one of the city's oldest, poorest, and most neglected neighborhoods, a tangled knot of crumbling brick tenements and forgotten factories. It was a place Alistair's limousine driver actively avoided. It was a place Ethel Corp did not deliver to. Alistair stood in front of the massive, interactive map in his office. He pinpointed the vendor's location, then zoomed east across the river. The Narrows appeared on the screen, a dense, chaotic grid that stood in stark contrast to the orderly, geometric layout of the financial district. This was where his digital search had failed. It was a blind spot, a part of the city that existed largely off the grid. "I'm going there," Alistair said, his voice quiet but firm. Harris, standing beside him, stiffened. "Sir, I would strongly advise against that. It's not a safe area. If you want to pursue this, I can dispatch a team. They'll be discreet." "Your teams have been discreet for over a week, Harris, and they found nothing. I'm going myself." "Sir, the security risk." "The security risk," Alistair cut him off, his voice sharp, "is that we lose her This is the only lead we have. Get the car. No security detail. Just you and me. And Harris," he added, turning to face his chief. "Lose the suit. We're not going to a board meeting." An hour later, they were crossing the bridge. Alistair looked out the window, the gleaming glass towers of his world shrinking in the rear-view mirror. The Narrows rose up to meet them, a landscape of faded brick, rusting fire escapes, and graffiti-covered walls. The streets were narrower, the buildings closer together, as if huddling for warmth. People filled the sidewalks, a vibrant, chaotic river of life. Kids kicked a scuffed soccer ball in the street, their laughter echoing off the walls. Women carried groceries in mesh bags. Men gathered on corners, talking and smoking. It was a world operating on a different frequency from his own. Harris drove slowly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes scanning every alley and doorway. Alistair felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He was a foreigner here, an intruder. His clothes, even his toned-down slacks and cashmere sweater, felt like a costume. They parked the car and got out. The air smelled different here, a mix of street food, exhaust fumes, and something vaguely sweet, like baked bread. They had a photo of the girl, and they started showing it around. The first few people shrugged, shook their heads, and hurried on their way. They were met with suspicion, their questions deflecting off a wall of communal distrust. Who were these two men in a luxury sedan asking about a little girl? But Alistair persisted. He approached an old woman tending a small flower box on her windowsill. He softened his voice, removing the hard, commanding edge it usually carried. "Excuse me, ma'am. We're looking for this child. We're not from the police. We just need to talk to her." The woman peered at the photo, then at Alistair's face, her gaze lingering on his eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice raspy. She returned something of mine," Alistair said, the lie coming surprisingly easily. "Something very important. I just want to thank her." The woman seemed to consider this. She looked at the photo again. "Maya," she said. "Her name is Maya." Alistair's heart leaped. A name. "Maya. Do you know where she lives?" "She lives with her grandfather, Elias, down on Water Street, the old clockmaker's shop, the one with the faded blue door." She pointed down the street towards the river. "He's a good man, Elias. Looks after her right. You be good to them, you hear?" "We will," Alistair promised, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't identify. "Thank you." They found the shop easily. It was a small, unassuming storefront, squeezed between a laundromat and a bakery. The words, "Elias Antiques and Horology," were painted on the glass, the gold leaf peeling and faded. A large, motionless clock face hung above the door, its hands frozen at 3:15. The door was, as the woman had said, a faded, peeling blue. Alistair took a deep breath. He felt a strange sense of trepidation, as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice. He was about to step through a door, into a past he thought was dead and buried. He raised his hand and knocked. The sound echoed in the quiet street. For a long moment, there was no response. Alistair was about to knock again when he heard the sound of a bolt being drawn, and the blue door creaked open. An old man stood in the doorway. He was tall and wiry, with a cloud of white hair and a face that seemed to be carved from ancient, weathered wood. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue, were sharp and intelligent. He wore a simple work apron over a plaid shirt, and in his hand he held a small brass gear. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Alistair held up the photo of Maya. "I'm looking for this little girl, Maya. I was told she lives here." The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. His gaze shifted from Alistair to Harris, who stood a few paces back, trying to look unobtrusive and failing. The man, Elias, exuded a quiet, powerful sense of stillness. He was not easily intimidated. "Who's asking?" "My name is Alistair Finch." He saw no flicker of recognition in the old man's eyes. To Elias, he was just a stranger at the door. "I believe she has something that belongs to me. Or rather, she gave me something. I just want to talk to her about it." Elias looked at the photo again, then back at Alistair. He seemed to be taking his measure, looking past the expensive clothes and the carefully controlled demeanor. "Maya is at school. She'll be home in an hour." "May we wait?" Alistair asked, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. Elias considered him for another long moment, then nodded slowly and stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in," he said. Alistair and Harris stepped inside. The contrast with the world outside was immediate. The shop was dim, cluttered, and smelled of wood polish, old paper, and metal. Sunlight struggled through the dusty front window, illuminating 1,000 tiny particles dancing in the air. The walls were lined with shelves, crammed with clocks of every shape and size. Grandfather clocks stood like silent sentinels in the corners. Cuckoo clocks, their little wooden birds dormant, hung in clusters. Delicate mantel clocks and heavy ship's chronometers sat side by side. The air was thick with the sound of ticking, a soft polyrhythmic symphony that was strangely calming. It was a place out of time, a museum of frozen moments. "Please," Elias said, gesturing towards 2 worn wooden stools. "Have a seat." Harris remained standing by the door, a silent guard. Alistair sat, feeling oversized and clumsy, amidst the delicate machinery. Elias went back to a large workbench at the back of the shop, which was a chaotic landscape of tiny tools, magnifying glasses, and the intricate viscera of disassembled timepieces. "You are a clockmaker," Alistair stated, the words feeling inadequate. "I am," Elias said without looking up, his gnarled fingers expertly manipulating a tiny pair of tweezers. "I fix things that are broken. I try to make them whole again. A difficult job. Time has a way of breaking everything, eventually." The words hung in the ticking air, imbued with a weight that Alistair felt in his bones. He looked around the shop, at the hundreds of faces, all telling a different time, all stopped or moving at their own pace. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he had stepped into a metaphor for his own life. He was a man whose own clock had stopped 15 years ago, on the night of the fire. He had been running on momentum ever since, a collection of gears and springs moving without purpose. "Where did she get it?" Alistair asked, his voice low. Elias finally looked up, his pale blue eyes pinning Alistair in place. "Get what?" "The wooden bird," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He reached into his pocket and placed the 2 halves of the carving on the dusty counter between them. Elias's face remained impassive, but Alistair saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not surprise, but a deep, ancient sadness. "I carved it for her," Elias said, his voice even. "She loves birds. She finds them in her books and asks me to make them for her. A sparrow, a robin. That one was a wren." "And the paper inside?" Alistair pressed, leaning forward. "The sequence of numbers. Where did that come from?" Elias was silent for a long time. The only sounds were the ticking of the clocks and the distant rumble of a truck on the street outside. He picked up one half of the wooden wren, turning it over and over in his calloused fingers. "Some things," he said softly, "are best left broken. Some doors are not meant to be opened." Before Alistair could respond, the bell above the door chimed, and a small figure burst into the shop, bringing a gust of cold air and a torrent of youthful energy with her. "Grandpa, guess what? Mrs. Gable gave me a gold star on my spelling test." It was her, Maya. Her red coat was unzipped, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold. She stopped short when she saw Alistair, her eyes widening in recognition. "It's you," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "The sad man." Alistair felt the words like a physical blow. Not Mr. Finch? Not the CEO? Not the billionaire? The sad man. To this child, that was his entire identity. He didn't know how to respond. He, a man who could command boardrooms and sway markets with a single sentence, was rendered speechless by a 7-year-old girl. Maya walked over to him, her initial shyness replaced by an open, uncomplicated curiosity. She looked at the broken wooden bird on the counter. "You found the secret," she said, her voice filled with a conspiratorial delight, as if they were sharing a game. "Grandpa puts secrets in all my birds." Alistair looked from the girl to the old man. Elias's face was a mask, unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on his granddaughter with an expression of fierce, profound love. "What kind of secrets, Maya?" Alistair asked gently. "Just things," she said with a shrug. "Sometimes it's a pretty stone I found, or a picture I drew. Grandpa says it's good to have a safe place for your treasures." Her gaze fell on the scrap of paper. That one was his treasure. He said it was a piece of a map to find a friend. A map to find a friend. The simple, childish words cut through 15 years of self-deception. That's what the Daedalus key had been. Not just an encryption algorithm, but a map that only he and Liam could read. A path to a future they were supposed to walk together. "Why did you give it to me?" Alistair asked, his voice hoarse. Maya looked up at him, her brown eyes impossibly clear and honest. "I told you. You looked sad, like you'd lost something. I thought maybe you needed a map, too." Elias finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Maya, why don't you go to the back and get started on your homework? We have guests." "Okay, Grandpa." She gave Alistair one last, curious look, then skipped towards a curtained-off doorway at the back of the shop, her worn sneakers scuffing on the wooden floor. When she was gone, the silence returned, heavier than before. "A friend gave me that piece of paper many years ago," Elias said, his gaze distant, as if looking back across a vast expanse of time. "He was in trouble. He was scared. He looked a lot like you do now, Mr. Finch. Haunted." Alistair leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Who was he? What was his name?" "He didn't give me a name," Elias said, his eyes returning to Alistair's face. "He told me he had to disappear. He said powerful men wanted what he had created, and they would hurt people to get it. He gave me that paper and a few other things. He told me to keep them safe. He said that one day someone might come looking for them, someone who understood their meaning. He told me not to give them to a man seeking power or wealth, but to a man seeking a friend." For 15 years, Alistair had sought power. He had amassed more wealth than he could spend in 100 lifetimes. And in all that time, he hadn't had a single friend. Not a real one. He had colleagues, employees, rivals, but no one who knew the man he had been before the fire. He had become the very thing Liam had warned him against. "He was my friend," Alistair said, the words feeling like a confession. "His name was Liam. I thought he was dead." Elias nodded slowly, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "I suspected as much. The way you look at that piece of wood. You are not just seeing a toy. You are seeing a ghost." He reached under his workbench and pulled out a small, dust-covered wooden box. He placed it on the counter and unlocked it with a tiny brass key that he wore on a chain around his neck. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn velvet, were 4 more crudely carved wooden animals: a fox, a bear, a rabbit, and an owl. "He came back 4 more times over the years," Elias explained. "Never for long, just long enough to give me another piece of his map. He never told me what it was for. He just asked me to keep them safe. He said he was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, hoping the right person would find their way home." Alistair stared at the carvings, his heart pounding. 5 fragments. He had 3 in his memory. That made 8, half the key. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for. It was a tangible link to a past he thought was irrevocably lost. It was a second chance. "Why?" Alistair asked, looking up at the old clockmaker. "Why would he do this? Why not just contact me?" Elias gave him a sad, knowing look. "Perhaps he thought you weren't ready. Or perhaps he was trying to protect you. The men he was afraid of. Maybe he thought they were still watching you." The thought sent a chill down Alistair's spine. He had always assumed the fire was an accident. But what if it wasn't? What if Liam had been targeted? And if he had, that meant that someone, somewhere, knew about Daedalus. And they might still be looking for the key. "I need them," Alistair said, his voice raw with urgency. "Elias, I need those pieces." The old man closed the lid of the box, his hand resting on it protectively. "The man who gave me these was a good man. He was trying to build something beautiful. He told me it would change the world for the better. But the world, Mr. Finch, is full of men who take beautiful things and twist them into weapons." He looked Alistair directly in the eye, his pale blue gaze unwavering. "Tell me, Mr. Finch, the man who stands before me now, are you the friend he was trying to find? Or are you one of the men he was running from?" The question struck Alistair with the force of a physical impact. "Are you one of the men he was running from?" 15 years of ruthless acquisitions, of crushing competitors, of prioritizing profit above all else. The evidence was damning. He had built Ethel into a fortress, but in doing so, he had become its jailer, trapped by the very power he had cultivated. He looked around the dusty, ticking shop, a place where time was not a commodity to be measured in nanoseconds and market cycles, but a force to be respected, mended, and understood. He looked at the steady, unwavering gaze of the old man who had unknowingly served as a guardian of his past. And he thought of the little girl in the other room who had seen past the billion-dollar facade to the sad man underneath. He had a choice. He could continue on his current path, using this new-found knowledge as another asset, another piece of leverage in his corporate game. Or he could try to become the man Liam believed him to be, the friend he was leaving a map for. "I don't know," Alistair answered, the honesty of the admission feeling both terrifying and liberating. "For a long time. I have been the man he was running from. I thought I thought building a powerful company was the only way to honor his memory. I thought success would fill the hole he left behind. I was wrong. All I did was build a bigger, emptier room. He looked down at his hands, hands that signed billion-dollar deals and approved termination orders. They felt alien to him. But I want to be the friend he's looking for. I want to find him. I want to understand what happened. And I want to finish what we started. The right way, this time. Elias watched him, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be weighing Alistair's words, not for their content, but for the truth behind them. He was a man accustomed to listening to the subtle mechanics of things, to sensing the slightest imbalance in a complex system. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. He pushed the wooden box across the counter towards Alistair. "A clock does not run on a single gear," Elias said softly. "It requires all the pieces to work in harmony. It seems your clock has been missing some pieces for a very long time." Alistair opened the box. He carefully took out the 4 wooden animals. Just like the wren, each had a hidden seam. He opened them one by one. Inside each was a tiny folded slip of paper, identical to the first. He now possessed 5 fragments of the Daedalus key from Elias, and he held 3 more in his memory, 8 pieces in total. He was halfway there. "Thank you," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Elias, seeing not just a simple shopkeeper, but a man of profound integrity, a silent keeper of a sacred trust. "You've protected this for 15 years. You have no idea what this means." "I think I do," Elias said. "It means a man might get a chance to find his friend. There are few things in this world more important than that." As Alistair was carefully placing the precious fragments into a secure pocket, Maya reappeared from the back room, a textbook in her hand. "Grandpa, I don't understand this math problem." Elias's stern demeanor instantly melted away, replaced by a warm, grandfatherly affection. "Let's have a look, little bird." Alistair watched them, his head bent over the book, the old man's gnarled finger tracing a line of numbers, the little girl's brow furrowed in concentration. It was a scene of such simple, profound intimacy that it made his chest ache. This was a world he knew nothing about. He had a staff of tutors for the children of his executives, but he couldn't remember the last time he'd seen a parent simply helping their child with homework. I should go," Alistair said, feeling like an intruder. "I have work to do." He turned to Maya. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling completely inadequate. "Your gift. It was the most important thing anyone has ever given me." Maya beamed, her gap-toothed smile lighting up the dim shop. "Does it make you feel less sad?" she asked. Alistair considered the question. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in his core. The guilt was still a heavy cloak on his shoulders, but for the first time in 15 years, it was pierced by a tiny, fragile pinprick of light. Hope. "Yes," he said, and he was surprised to find that it was the truth. "It does." He and Harris walked back to the car in silence. The Narrows no longer looked threatening to Alistair. It looked resilient. It looked like a community. It looked like a place where a man could hide a secret and a little girl could change the world with a simple act of kindness. As they drove back across the bridge, towards the gleaming towers of his kingdom, Alistair knew that he was not the same man who had crossed it that morning. He had gone in search of a clue, a piece of data. He had come back with a purpose. Back in the secure sanctuary of his office, he laid the 5 new fragments out beside the first one. He entered their codes into his terminal, alongside the 3 he held in his memory. The system began to churn through the data. With 8 of the 16 fragments, the decryption simulation was no longer gibberish. It was still heavily fragmented, but patterns began to emerge. He could see ghosts of words, echoes of file structures, and he saw one name, repeated over and over in the corrupted data. Thorne, Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Kronos Technologies, Ethel's biggest and most ruthless competitor. Back when Ethel was just a startup, Thorne had tried to buy them out. Liam, ever the idealist, had been vehemently opposed, while Alistair, the pragmatist, had been tempted by the offer. It had been one of their biggest arguments. Ultimately, they had rejected the buyout. A few weeks later, the lab burned down. At the time, Alistair had been too consumed by grief to make the connection. But now, it seemed like a terrifying possibility. Had Thorne been responsible for the fire? Was he the reason Liam had been forced to disappear? The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture that was darker than he could have ever imagined. He now understood Liam's paranoia, his need for secrecy. Liam hadn't just been hiding from the world. He had been hiding from Marcus Thorne. And if Thorne knew about Daedalus back then, he was likely still looking for it. Alistair realized the game had changed. This wasn't just about finding a lost friend anymore. It was about protecting their creation from a man who would undoubtedly twist it into something monstrous. Daedalus in the hands of Marcus Thorne would not be a tool of empowerment. It would be a weapon of control. He had to find the remaining 8 fragments before Thorne did. The map was incomplete, and the clock, Elias's ever-present metaphor, was ticking. Liam's trail of breadcrumbs had led him this far. Now he had to figure out where the next one was hidden. The quest for the remaining fragments consumed Alistair. He began to live a double life. By day, he was the commanding CEO of Athel Corp, attending meetings and making strategic decisions, his outward demeanor as cold and efficient as ever. But by night, he became a detective, a cryptographer, a ghost hunter, poring over the fragmented data recovered from the half-key, searching for a clue, any clue that might lead him to the next breadcrumb. He repurposed a small, forgotten server room in the sub-basement of Ethel Tower, turning it into his secret command center. He filled it with state-of-the-art processing units, all air-gapped from the outside world, their sole purpose to reconstruct the ghost of Daedalus. He spent his nights bathed in the glow of the monitors, surrounded by the hum of cooling fans, feeling more like his younger self than he had in years. The fragmented data was a puzzle box of Liam's design. It was a mix of code, personal notes, and encrypted journal entries. Alistair began to piece together a timeline of the weeks leading up to the fire. He read Liam's frantic notes about Kronos Technologies' persistent, aggressive attempts to acquire their research. He saw Liam's growing paranoia, his conviction that they were being watched. Thorne doesn't want a partner, Allie. He wants a prize. He sees Daedalus as a weapon. Reading his friend's words was like hearing his voice from beyond the grave, a voice Alistair had ignored in his pursuit of pragmatism. The guilt was a physical weight. Amidst the technical data, there were personal touches that only Alistair would understand. References to late-night conversations, inside jokes, shared memories. Liam had designed this puzzle specifically for him. He had trusted that Alistair, and only Alistair, would be able to follow the trail. One recurring phrase in the decrypted text caught his attention. Remember the labyrinth. It was a reference to a favorite spot from their college days, an old, dusty, second-hand bookstore with towering, chaotic shelves that formed a veritable maze. The owner, a crusty old man named Arthur, had let them use a back room for their early experiments in exchange for them setting up his first computerized inventory system. They had spent hundreds of hours in that cramped, book-filled room, fueled by cheap coffee and boundless ambition. Was it possible that Liam had left something there? The next day, Alistair drove there himself, without Harris. The bookstore was exactly as he remembered it, a charming anachronism in a rapidly modernizing neighborhood. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the familiar smell of old paper and binding glue enveloped him. Arthur was still behind the counter, older, grayer, but with the same sharp, intelligent eyes behind his thick glasses. "Alistair Finch," Arthur said, not with surprise, but with the quiet acknowledgment of a man who has seen many chapters begin and end. "It's been a long time." "It has, Arthur," Alistair replied, feeling a wave of nostalgia. "I was wondering, is the back room still the same?" "More or less. No one's used it much since you and Liam left. The computer you built is still there. Probably a museum piece by now." Alistair walked to the back, his footsteps creaking on the old floorboards. He pushed open the door and stepped into his past. The room was just as cluttered as he remembered, with stacks of books and old circuit boards. And there, on a dusty table, was the computer they had built, its beige plastic case a relic from another era. He sat down and, with a sense of trepidation, pressed the power button. To his astonishment, it whirred to life, the old CRT monitor flickering before settling on a familiar command prompt. Liam had always been meticulous about backups. Alistair typed in his old password. Access granted. He navigated through the archaic file system until he found a hidden, encrypted partition. He entered the first 8 fragments of the dataless key. The partition unlocked. Inside was a single file, a video. He clicked on it. Liam's face filled the screen. He looked younger, his face etched with worry, but his eyes still bright with that familiar fire. He was in the back room of the bookstore, the video clearly filmed just days before the fire. "Ali," he said, his voice urgent, "if you're seeing this, it means 2 things. 1, you've found Elias in the first part of the map, and 2, I'm gone." He took a deep breath. "The fire, at the lab. It won't be an accident. Thorne is closing in. He's not going to stop. I can't let him get his hands on Daedalus. So I'm going to disappear. I'm going to let him think he's won, that our project is destroyed." He leaned closer to the camera. "I've broken the key. You have your half. I've scattered the other 8 fragments. I'm leaving a trail for you, Ali. A trail only you can follow. The next piece. Think about our first big success. The place where Daedalus was truly born. The old observatory on Mount Cinder. We presented our thesis there. You talked about network architecture. I talked about changing the world." He smiled, a sad, fleeting expression. "I'm sorry, my friend. I wish there was another way. Don't trust anyone at Athol. Thorne might have eyes everywhere. Find the key, unlock our dream, and be the man I know you are, not the man they want you to be. Be safe." The video ended. Alistair sat in the silence of the dusty room, tears streaming down his face for the first time in 15 years. It wasn't just grief. It was relief, anger, and a fierce, burning determination. Liam was alive, and he had left him a mission. During this intense period of discovery, Alistair found himself drawn back to the Narrows. He would go to Elias's shop, not just for information, but for the quiet company of the old man and the infectious, grounding presence of his granddaughter. He would sit on a stool, watching Elias meticulously clean the gears of a 19th century carriage clock, and they would talk. Alistair told him about Liam, about Daedalus, about Marcus Thorne. Elias listened, offering not advice, but a steady, non-judgmental presence that Alistair found more comforting than any therapy. He started helping Maya with her math homework, finding a simple, forgotten pleasure in explaining fractions and decimals. He bought her a new red coat, a warm, properly fitting one, and was rewarded with a hug so fierce it nearly knocked him over. He began to see the neighborhood not as a blind spot, but as a vibrant, living organism. He learned about the struggles of its residents, the lack of funding for the local community center, the outdated equipment at Maya's school, the developer who was trying to buy up the tenements to build luxury condos. For the first time, he saw problems that he could solve, not as a CEO looking for a PR opportunity, but as a man with resources who could make a genuine difference. He made an anonymous donation to the community center, enough to keep it open for the next decade. He funded a new computer lab for Maya's school, filling it with the latest Ethel tablets. He used his army of corporate lawyers to anonymously fight the developer, burying him in legal challenges until he abandoned his plans. He was changing. The rigid, unfeeling shell he had built around himself was cracking, and the man he had been, the man Liam had known, was beginning to emerge. He was no longer just the sad man. He was becoming something more. Mount Cinder was a 2-hour drive from the city, a dormant volcano whose peak housed a university observatory, long since decommissioned and fallen into disrepair. Alistair drove himself, the winding mountain road a welcome distraction. As he ascended, the sprawling city gave way to dense forest, the air growing crisp and clean. He and Liam had come here for a university symposium, two ambitious students with a radical idea, presenting their thesis on decentralized networks to a room full of skeptical academics. It was here, under the dome of the Great Telescope, that they first publicly articulated their vision for Daedalus. Liam had spoken with such passion, such conviction, that by the end, even the most jaded professors were leaning forward in their seats, captivated. Alistair remembered the feeling of elation on the drive home, the sense that they were on the cusp of something truly revolutionary. The observatory was even more dilapidated than he had imagined. The white dome was stained with rust, and weeds grew thick through cracks in the asphalt of the parking lot. A chain-link fence, topped with barbed wire, surrounded the perimeter, but a section of it had been pulled back, offering easy access. He slipped through the gap and approached the main building. The door was locked, but it was an old, simple lock. Using a multi-tool he now carried, a habit picked up from watching Harris, he managed to jimmy it open. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous, circular room. A massive, antique telescope dominated the center of the space, a silent giant pointing towards the heavens. A layer of dust covered everything, and the air was cold and musty. He made his way to the small lecture hall, where they had given their presentation. The rows of seats were empty, a silent audience of ghosts. He walked onto the small stage, standing at the spot where Liam had stood, and tried to see the room through his friend's eyes. Where would he hide a fragment of code in a place like this? It had to be somewhere meaningful, somewhere only Alistair would think to look. He thought back to their presentation. There had been a moment of crisis. The projector had failed, and Alistair, the pragmatist, had started to panic. But Liam, ever the improviser, had simply laughed. He had abandoned their slides and grabbed a piece of chalk, striding over to the large, rolling blackboard at the back of the stage. He had sketched out the entire architecture of Daedalus from memory, his hands flying across the slate, leaving a trail of white dust and brilliant ideas. "The technology is just the vessel, Ali," he had whispered to him later. "The idea is what matters. You can always find a new way to draw the map." Alistair turned and looked at the blackboard. It was still there, pushed against the back wall. It was covered in faded, meaningless equations, left by the last class to have used the room. He ran his hand over the dusty surface. Was it possible? He examined the wooden frame of the blackboard. It was old, solid oak. On the side, he found it. A small, almost invisible crack in the wood. It was a hairline fracture, but it looked deliberate. He used the blade of his multi-tool to carefully pry at the crack. A small section of the frame popped loose. Tucked inside a shallow, hollowed-out space was a small, tightly rolled scroll of paper tied with a piece of twine. He carefully unrolled it. Inside was the 9th fragment of the Daedalus key, and beneath it a short, handwritten note in Liam's familiar scrawl. "Halfway there, my friend. Remember our promise? To build something that lasts longer than we do. Something etched in stone. Your next stop is a place of endings and new beginnings, where we said goodbye to one dream and hello to another. L, etched in stone. A place of endings and new beginnings." It took him a moment to decipher the riddle. Then he knew. The university campus had a memorial wall for alumni who had made significant contributions to science. After they had secured their first round of funding for the Daedalus project, they had been honored with a small plaque on that wall. It had been a goodbye to their lives as students and a hello to their future as innovators. That's where Liam had hidden the 10th fragment. He was following the map, and with each step, he felt closer to his friend, closer to the truth, and closer to the man he was supposed to be. The search became his sole focus. He delegated most of his day-to-day responsibilities at Ethel to his COO, a capable woman who was both relieved and bewildered by his sudden trust in her. His time was his own now, to be spent hunting ghosts and deciphering riddles. He found the 10th fragment behind their plaque on the memorial wall, just as Liam's clue had suggested. The note with it was another cryptic clue, leading him to a different city, a different chapter of their shared history. Alistair's journey took him across the country. He visited the garage in Silicon Valley, where they had built their first working prototype, the coffee shop in Seattle, where they'd sketched out their business plan on a napkin, the small diner in Chicago, where they had celebrated their first major breakthrough. In each location, he found a fragment of the key, hidden in a place that was significant only to the two of them. With each piece he found, another section of Daedalus was unlocked. The picture was becoming clearer. It was not just a decentralized network. It was a revolutionary form of artificial intelligence, a learning system designed to solve humanity's biggest problems: climate change, disease, poverty. It was benevolent, powerful, and in the wrong hands, catastrophic. He also uncovered more of Thorne's treachery. Encrypted emails between Thorne and a shadowy third party revealed the plot. Thorne hadn't just wanted their technology. He had been hired to steal it. The fire was meant to be a cover for the theft of their data drives. But Liam, in his paranoia, had swapped the drives for fakes and initiated a scorched earth protocol that had wiped their local servers, leading everyone to believe the project was lost forever. Liam hadn't just been running, he had been actively protecting their dream. Alistair, fueled by a cold fury, began to turn the tables. He used his own considerable resources to investigate Marcus Thorne, not as a competitor, but as a criminal. He hired private investigators, forensic accountants, and cybersecurity experts. He started building a case, brick by brick, creating a weapon of his own, one forged from truth and the rule of law. Throughout his journey, he stayed in constant contact with Elias and Maya. They became his anchor, his touchstone to the new reality he was building for himself. He would call them from a hotel room in another city, describing the places he was visiting, the memories they evoked. He sent Maya postcards from every stop, each with a picture of a different local bird. In return, they would tell him about life in the Narrows, about the new books in the school library, about a cuckoo clock that Elias had finally managed to repair. These simple conversations were a lifeline, reminding him of what he was fighting for. It wasn't just about avenging his friend or reclaiming their project. It was about building a world where the kindness of a little girl and the integrity of an old man were not just aberrations, but the foundation of everything. He had found 15 of the 16 fragments. There was only one left. The last clue from Liam was the most cryptic of all. For the final piece, you don't have to travel at all. It's in the one place you've been too afraid to look. The heart of the machine you built without me. L. The heart of the machine. Ethel Tower. He had been so focused on looking outward, on retracing his steps with Liam, that he had never considered that the final piece of the puzzle was right under his nose. In the heart of the corporate empire he had built on the ashes of their dream. He knew exactly where it had to be. In the center of the Ethel lobby stood a massive, abstract sculpture he had commissioned years ago. It was a swirling vortex of polished steel and black granite, meant to represent the flow of information in the digital age. At the time, he had thought it was a fitting monument to his success. Now he saw it for what it was, a cold, lifeless cenotaph. But deep within its core was a small, climate-controlled, electromagnetically shielded compartment. It was designed to hold the company's most valuable intellectual property, the source code for their operating system. He had called it the Vault. He now realized that Liam must have planted the final fragment there before the fire, in the very heart of the company they were supposed to build together, a Trojan horse of hope in a bastion of soulless commerce. Getting to it would not be easy. The vault was protected by a labyrinth of security systems that he himself had designed. It would require him to physically bypass biometric scanners, pressure plates, and laser grids. It was a heist, and the target was his own past. He was finally ready to look. He was ready to go home. The night of the heist was quiet and still. Alistair waited until Ethel Tower had emptied, until the only signs of life were the cleaning crews and the graveyard shift of security guards. He sat in his office on the top floor, The city lights spread out below him, and felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in 15 years, his path was clear. Harris stood beside him, his expression a mixture of concern and unwavering loyalty. Alistair had finally told him everything about Liam, Daedalus, Thorn, the keys. He had expected shock, disbelief. Instead, Harris had simply nodded, his craggy face set in grim determination. "What are your orders, sir?" he had asked. "My orders, Harris," Alistair said, standing up and heading for the door, "are that you call me Alistair." The descent into the heart of the tower felt symbolic. They took a private service elevator down to the sub-levels, the floors counting down, each one taking him further from the sky and deeper into the foundations of his own creation. The vault was located 5 stories underground, encased in a cube of reinforced concrete. The first obstacle was a biometric scanner that required a palm print and a retinal scan. As CEO, Alistair's biometrics were in the system. The heavy steel door hissed open, revealing a long, white, sterile corridor. The floor was a pressure plate. Any weight distribution that didn't match the programmed gait of an authorized user would trigger the alarm. Alistair had designed it himself, based on his own stride. He took a deep breath and walked, his footsteps perfectly even, his pace measured. It was like walking in his own footsteps from a lifetime ago. He reached the end of the corridor. Before him was the final door, the entrance to the vault itself. Between him and the door was a grid of invisible lasers. He put on a pair of augmented reality glasses, and the red beams of light became visible, a complex web of deadly energy. There was a pattern, a sequence to bypass the grid, a series of movements like a deadly ballet. He had programmed it himself, based on a chess problem he and Liam had once spent an entire weekend trying to solve. The Queen's Gambit. He moved through the grid, his body twisting and turning, his movements precise and economical. He reached the other side and deactivated the system. He was at the final door. This one required a key. Not a physical key, but a voice print identification, a spoken passphrase. The phrase was, "What are we building?" He stood before the door, the cool, recycled air humming around him. He thought about the answer he would have given for the last 15 years. A legacy, an empire, a monument. But that wasn't the right answer. That wasn't the password. He thought about Liam, about Maya, about Elias. He thought about the man he was trying to become. He leaned forward and spoke into the microphone, his voice clear and steady. "Something that matters." The lock clicked open. The final door slid away, revealing the inner sanctum. The vault was a small circular room, bathed in a soft blue light. In the center, on a raised pedestal, was a single black data drive, the source code for Ethel's operating system. But Alistair ignored it. He was looking at the pedestal itself. Etched into its base, so faintly it was almost invisible, was a symbol, a labyrinth. It was the logo of the old bookstore. He ran his fingers over the cool metal, finding a tiny, almost imperceptible button hidden within the design. He pressed it. A section of the pedestal slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. And inside, resting on a bed of black foam, was the final piece of the puzzle. A small, simple, wooden labyrinth puzzle, the kind a child would play with. And tucked into its center was the 16th and final folded piece of paper. He had it. He had the full key. He turned to leave, the final fragment clutched in his hand, a feeling of triumph surging through him. And then the room was flooded with harsh white light. The doors hissed shut. A voice, amplified and chillingly familiar, echoed through the chamber. "Well done, Alistair. I knew you'd figure it out eventually. I was counting on it." Marcus Thorne appeared on a monitor on the wall. He was older, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes held the same cold, predatory ambition. "You've done all the hard work for me, gathering all the pieces. Now, if you'll be so kind as to hand over the key, we can bring this little reunion to an end." "It's over, Thorne," Alistair said, his voice steady, betraying none of the shock he felt. "I know everything. The fire, the stolen research. It's over." Thorne laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Is it? I own the board of this company, Alistair. While you were off chasing ghosts, I was buying souls. They're voting you out as we speak. By morning, Ethel will be a subsidiary of Kronos, and Daedalus will be mine." He saw it then. The checkmate. Thorne hadn't just been waiting for him to find the key. He had been orchestrating a hostile takeover of Ethel itself. Alistair had been so focused on the past that he had ignored the present threat. "You won't be able to activate it without Liam," Alistair bluffed. "The system requires both of us." "Ah, Liam," Thorne said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The tragic, romantic fool. A loose end I intend to tie up as soon as I have the key. Don't worry, Alistair. I have the best cryptographers in the world. They'll find your friend. But first, they'll crack Daedalus. Now, open the door and give me the key." Alistair looked at the key in his hand. He looked at Thorne's smug, triumphant face on the screen. He had come this far, followed the map, pieced together the past. He would not let it end like this. He had one last move to play, a move that Liam, in his genius, had prepared for. He walked over to the main terminal in the vault, the one that controlled the core systems of Ethel Tower. He inserted the drive containing Ethel's operating system. Then he began to type. He entered all 16 fragments of the Daedalus key. A new command prompt appeared on the screen, a simple, elegant interface that he hadn't seen in 15 years. The Daedalus system. A message appeared. "Welcome, Alistair. Voice print authentication required to proceed. Please state your name." "Alistair Finch," he said. Authentication confirmed. Awaiting secondary authentication. This was the final lock, the digital handshake. It required Liam's voice. But Alistair had something just as good. He accessed the hidden partition on the old computer from the bookstore, the one containing the video of Liam. He played the audio. "My friend, be the man I know you are." The system processed the sound. Secondary voice print sample identified. Liam Harrison. Authentication confirmed. "Welcome, creators. Daedalus is online. What are your orders?" On the screen, Thorne's face had gone pale. "What are you doing, Finch? Stop!" Alistair smiled, a true, genuine smile. "I'm keeping a promise," he said. He typed a single command, initiate revelation. The system asked for a confirmation. He pressed Y. Instantly, Daedalus went to work. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of truth. It moved through Ethel's network, and then beyond, into the global web. It was a benevolent virus, a self-replicating agent of transparency. It accessed Thorne's secure servers at Kronos, bypassing his firewalls as if they were made of tissue paper. It found the encrypted files, the hidden accounts, the incriminating emails, and it began to publish them, all of them, to every major news outlet, law enforcement agency, and stock market regulator in the world. A message appeared on Thorne's monitor, A message from Daedalus itself, composed in Liam's voice, synthesized from years of audio data. "Hello, Marcus. Let's talk about the fire." Thorne stared in horror as the evidence of his crimes began to flood the globe. The hostile takeover of Ethel collapsed in minutes. Kronos' stock price flatlined. Warrants were being issued for his arrest. He was ruined. Alistair typed one final command. A message, encrypted and untraceable, sent to a single, hidden IP address that had been embedded deep within the Daedalus code. "I have the key. The dream is safe. It's time to come home." The doors to the vault slid open. Alistair walked out, leaving the chaos behind him. Harris was waiting for him, a look of awe on his face. "It's done," Alistair said. It was finally done. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Marcus Thorne was arrested, his corporate empire crumbling under the weight of his own hubris, and a decade's worth of criminal activity brought to light by the Daedalus revelation. The Ethel board, cleansed of Thorne's collaborators, gave Alistair their unanimous, unwavering support. The world was buzzing with the news, not just of Thorne's downfall, but of the mysterious, powerful AI that had acted as the agent of his demise. Daedalus was no longer a secret. Alistair, however, deflected the attention. He issued a single press release, stating that Ethel Corp would be restructuring and dedicating its resources to a new philanthropic initiative. Then he went dark. He went home to his silent penthouse and waited. 3 days later, there was a knock on his door. Not the polite, deferential knock of a staff member, but a firm, familiar rhythm he hadn't heard in 15 years. He opened the door. Liam stood there. He was older, his face thinner, lined with the years of hiding and looking over his shoulder. His hair was shorter, flecked with gray. But his eyes were the same. Bright, intense, and full of a fire that had never been extinguished. For a moment, they just stood there, two friends separated by a chasm of time and grief. Then Liam smiled, a slow, hesitant grin that broke across his face like a sunrise. "You got my message," he said. Alistair couldn't speak. He just pulled his friend into an embrace, clapping him on the back, the years of loss and guilt and loneliness melting away in a flood of overwhelming relief. They talked for hours, for days. They filled in the missing 15 years, Liam recounting his life on the run, moving from one small town to the next, always watching, always waiting for a sign. Alistair confessed his own journey, the soulless empire he had built, the emptiness of his success, and the little girl in the red coat who had shown him the way back. Together, they made a new plan. Ethel Corp was dismantled, its profitable but soulless divisions sold off. In its place, they formed the Daedalus Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to using their AI to solve real-world problems. Their new headquarters was not a gleaming tower in the financial district, but a repurposed warehouse in the Narrows, a place of community, resilience, and hope. Alistair never returned to his penthouse. He sold it, along with all the trappings of his former life. He moved into a modest apartment a few blocks from the foundation, a place where he could hear the sounds of the city, the laughter of children in the street. His life was no longer silent. It was filled with noise, with purpose, with people. A few months later, the Daedalus Foundation held its official launch party. It wasn't a press conference or a gala. It was a block party, held in the streets of the Narrows. The whole neighborhood was there, enjoying free food, live music, and the festive atmosphere. Alistair stood by a barbecue grill, flipping burgers a simple apron tied around his waist. He was laughing, a real, unforced laugh, as Liam tried to explain network theory to a bewildered but fascinated group of local kids. He looked across the crowded street and saw Elias, sitting on a folding chair, tapping his foot to the music, a serene smile on his face. And next to him, dancing with a joyful, unself-conscious abandon, was Maya. She was wearing a new dress, a bright, sunny yellow, and her hair was tied back with a matching ribbon. She saw him looking and waved, her smile as brilliant as ever. He waved back, his heart swelling with a feeling he now recognized as pure, unadulterated happiness. Later, as the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the brick buildings, Maya ran up to him. She pressed something into his hand. It was another wooden bird, this one beautifully carved and sanded smooth, the work of a master craftsman who had taken his time. It was a perfect, intricate falcon. "Grandpa made it for you," she said. "He said you're not the sad man anymore. You're the falcon, because you helped everyone fly." Alistair closed his hand around the gift, the smooth, warm wood a comforting weight in his palm. He looked at this little girl, this catalyst, this tiny, improbable key who had unlocked his life. He looked at his friend, alive and whole, building their dream. He looked at the community around him, a vibrant tapestry of life that he was now a part of. The first bird had held a secret, a map that had led him back to his past. This one held something far more precious. It held his future. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he was finally home.